Notice how strange this is. You say you want to be chosen, not vaguely admired, not half-liked, not kept in a gray zone where everything feels emotionally possible, but nothing is actually secure. You want clarity, reciprocity, real desire, real intention, someone who does not hesitate to move toward you, someone who makes it obvious that they want you in their life. And then it happens. They choose you, clearly, calmly, without games, without making you prove yourself first. And something in you does not relax. It tightens. That reaction deserves much more attention than most people give it, because from the outside, this is supposed to be the easy part. The confusion is over. The question mark is gone. The thing you thought you wanted is now standing right in front of you, offered directly. So why does it suddenly feel difficult to breathe inside it? Why does being wanted sometimes feel more destabilizing than being ignored? Why does your system seem almost more prepared for ambiguity than for real emotional certainty? Carl Jung would take that seriously right away. He would not brush it off as random fear or simple indecision. Jung always looked beneath the event to the psychic structure underneath it. He would ask, what kind of self was built inside longing, and what happens to that self when longing is no longer necessary? That is the beginning of this pattern. Because for many people, being chosen does not only bring relief, it brings exposure. A real-life example makes this easier to feel. Imagine someone who has spent years in emotionally uncertain relationships. They know how to survive mixed signals. They know how to overthink text, decode tone, stay loyal through inconsistency, and keep hope alive in situations that never quite settle. Then one day, they meet a person who is direct, not overwhelming, not dramatic, just clear. I like you. I want to see you. I'm here. For a brief moment, this feels good. Then the fear begins. Not because the person did something wrong, because certainty has entered the room. And certainty changes the entire emotional position of the self. When love is unclear, you can still chase, imagine, doubt, long, and interpret. Your identity stays active inside the gap. But when you are clearly chosen, the gap closes. Now, there is nothing to hide inside. No uncertain future to project onto. No emotional maze to keep you occupied. No delayed answer that lets you remain psychologically suspended. Now, something much more intimate is required. You have to receive. And receiving can be far more threatening than longing. This is one of the hardest truths in love. A lot of people think they are afraid of rejection. Sometimes they are. But very often, they're equally afraid of acceptance. Because rejection hurts. But it is familiar. It confirms old beliefs. It lets the self remain organized around striving, proving, waiting, surviving disappointment. Being chosen does something else. It confronts you with the possibility that you may no longer need the old struggle to define the relationship. And if your identity in love has been built around struggle, that can feel terrifying. You may already know the signs. Someone likes you clearly, and you start becoming suspicious. You wonder whether they are too available, too easy, too much, too into you. You begin scanning for what must be wrong, because the old signs of difficulty are missing. Or maybe you do not become suspicious. You become flat, numb, restless. You lose the emotional intensity you expected to feel and conclude that something must be missing. But what may actually be missing is not connection. It is the old anxiety, the old uncertainty, the old emotional hunger that once made attachment feel vivid. Carl Jung would say this is exactly where the unconscious starts revealing itself. Because being chosen does not only answer a longing, it activates the deeper pattern underneath the longing. What have you learned love feels like? What have you mistaken for attraction because it was familiar? What part of your psyche only knows how to organize around wanting, not having? These questions matter, because if the self has been shaped by emotional deprivation, then being wanted can feel more disorienting than being unseen. The unseen self knows what to do. It waits. It yearns. It proves. It hopes. It survives. But the chosen self is different. The chosen self has to become visible in another way. Now you are not just the one who wants. You are the one who is wanted. And that position can feel incredibly vulnerable. A lot of people do not realize this until they are in it. They spend years fantasizing about being loved clearly, then freeze the moment someone actually offers that clarity. Suddenly, the old emotional armor no longer fits. The old role of pursuer or overthinker becomes less relevant. The self must now inhabit a different kind of exposure. Because when someone chooses you, they are not only offering attention, they are offering a mirror. They are saying, in effect, I see value here. I want this. I am not hesitating. And if you do not yet carry that same conviction inside yourself, their certainty can feel almost intrusive, not because they are wrong, because their perception of you is larger than the one you feel safe living inside. This is one reason being chosen can trigger panic. Not dramatic panic, necessarily. More subtle. You begin second-guessing them, or yourself. You start needing more space right when closeness becomes real. You become emotionally tangled in small things that never bothered you before. The mind starts producing objections at the exact moment the relationship begins to stabilize. That timing is important. It tells you the reaction is not random. It is structural. Something in the psyche is bracing against the loss of a familiar pattern. A practical example. A man spends years being drawn to unavailable partners. Then he meets a woman who is emotionally direct. She communicates clearly, expresses interest, and does not make him guess where he stands. For the first few weeks, he feels calm. Then he begins feeling oddly anxious. He checks whether his attraction is real. He wonders if it is too much too fast, even though nothing actually escalated too quickly. He feels the urge to pull away, not because she is unsafe, but because the relationship is moving toward a kind of emotional reality he does not yet know how to inhabit. That is the key phrase here. A kind of emotional reality he does not yet know how to inhabit. Carl Jung would be very interested in that. He would say the psyche adapts to what it repeats. If love has repeatedly involved distance, proving waiting and uncertainty, then the ego develops around those rhythms. It learns who it is in side pursuit. It knows how to exist when love is conditional, delayed, or unstable. But when love becomes mutual and clear, the old self loses its map. You may feel this not only in romance, but in any place where being wanted becomes real. A workplace finally recognizes your value. A friendship deepens. A creative audience responds warmly. A person openly chooses you. And instead of simply stepping into the moment, you recoil a little. Why? Because being chosen creates responsibility of a different kind. No more fantasy. No more safe distance. Now your value is in the room with you. Now it must be lived, not just hoped for. Carl Jung would likely say that the ego often prefers longing because longing lets it remain unfinished. It can always say, one day, if I were chosen, if I were loved, if I were seen, then... But once the choosing actually happens, the fantasy collapses into reality. And reality asks something much harder than fantasy ever did. It asks you to stay, to receive, to let the old self reorganize. That can feel almost unbearable if you have quietly built an identity around not quite being chosen. This is one reason people sometimes sabotage the exact relationship they've been longing for. Not because they do not care, because care is now too real. The old defenses are no longer theoretical. They are activated. The old wound is no longer only longing to be healed. It is being touched. And being touched can feel more dangerous than being deprived. That sounds upside down, but many nervous systems understand it instantly. Deprivation is painful, but known. Being chosen is unknown. Deprivation confirms the old world. Being chosen threatens to change it. This is also why some people feel more chemistry with people who withhold than with people who offer. The withholding person activates old emotional machinery. The offering person invites a new one. If the new one is underdeveloped, then healthy attention can feel strangely less compelling simply because the psyche has not learned to read safety as intimacy yet. Carl Jung would not call that fate. He would call it unconscious pattern. And that is why his quote belongs here even before we move deeper. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. You will say, I just lose interest when people like me. Or, I only want what I can't have. Or, being chosen makes me feel trapped. And maybe all of that is true on the surface. But Jung would ask what lies underneath. What old emotional law gets activated the moment love becomes certain? What identity gets threatened when you no longer have a chase? What fear appears when wanting turns into receiving? That is the real threshold. Not simply, why do I panic when someone chooses me? But, what in me still trusts longing more than being loved? That is where the deeper work begins. Because once you see that clearly, being chosen is no longer just a relationship event. It becomes a doorway into the hidden structure of your attachment to uncertainty, your fear of receiving, and the self you became inside not quite being wanted enough. And that self may be far more attached to the old pain than you realized. That is the truth this part has to reveal. Not to shame you, to show you that the discomfort is not meaningless. It is the psyche reacting to a form of love that may be healthier than what it knows how to trust. And until that becomes conscious, the very thing you say you want may keep feeling like the very thing you do not know how to survive. Focus on the exact instant someone becomes clear about you, not ambiguous, not almost, not maybe, clear. They want you, they choose you. They are not hiding it, delaying it, or making you work for proof. That is the moment Carl Jung will want to examine very carefully, because the psyche often reveals more in the face of goodness than in the face of pain. Pain is easy to name. Goodness is harder when goodness threatens an old inner structure. This is where Jung becomes incredibly useful. He would not look at your discomfort and say, "You're just afraid of commitment," as if that explained anything. He would ask what kind of personality was built inside not being fully chosen. He would ask what complexes formed around uncertainty, what persona developed around longing, and what part you feel is in danger when love becomes direct. That question takes us immediately to Jung's understanding of the ego. The ego, for Jung, is the center of conscious identity. It is the part that says, "This is me, this is how I know myself, this is the position I occupy in life." That matters because many people unknowingly build an identity around not quite being chosen. They become the one who longs, the one who waits, the one who overthinks, the one who proves devotion, the one who almost gets the love, almost gets the certainty, almost gets fully received. It sounds painful, and it is, but it is also structured. The ego knows how to live there. Now imagine what happens when someone actually chooses you. Suddenly that whole structure is threatened. You are no longer only the one who wants. You are also the one who is wanted. You are no longer only the one who reaches. You are the one someone reaches for. That sounds beautiful, but psychologically it can be destabilizing because the old self had coherence inside longing. Clear love removes that old coherence before a new one is fully formed. Carl Jung would recognize that as a genuine psychic event. A real-life example helps here. Think of a woman who spent years emotionally attached to unavailable men. She learned how to read distance, survive silence, and feel intensely alive through uncertainty. Then she meets a man who is warm, honest, and consistent. He says he wants her. He follows through. He is emotionally present. Very quickly, instead of simply feeling grateful, she starts feeling suspicious. Not because he is suspicious, but because her old identity in love has no function here. She cannot organize around guessing anymore. She has to organize around receiving. And receiving, for many wounded psyches, feels more dangerous than striving. Jung would likely connect this to a complex. A complex, in his language, is an emotionally charged cluster of past experience that becomes activated in the present. If being wanted was historically unstable, conditional, manipulative, or rare, then being chosen now does not arrive as a clean experience. It enters a field already charged with fear, shame, disbelief, and vulnerability. So the present partner says, "I'm here," but the complex hears, "This won't last. There must be a catch. I don't know how to be in this position. If I trust this, I'll be exposed." That is why the body reacts before the mind has a good explanation. You may feel tightness in the chest, a sudden urge to pull back, a strange loss of attraction, an impulse to create emotional distance. The conscious mind then scrambles to explain what the body is already doing. Maybe I'm not ready. Maybe they're too much. Maybe the spark is missing. Maybe it's moving too fast. Sometimes those explanations are true, but Jung would insist that often they are rationalizations for something deeper. The old relational complex has been activated by healthy attention. This is where projection matters too. In painful or unavailable love, projection often thrives. You project hope, healing, fantasy, rescue, unfinished parental material, your own rejected worth, all onto the distant or inconsistent person. The relationship feels intense because the psyche is heavily involved. They become larger than life because they are carrying your unconscious material. But when someone chooses you clearly, projection has less room to operate in the same dramatic way. Now the relationship becomes more real, more grounded, less inflated. And strangely, that can feel less thrilling to a psyche used to projection-fueled longing. Carl Jung knew that inflated states often feel meaningful even when they are not stable. That is why someone can confuse obsession with intimacy, or uncertainty with soul depth, or the pain of not being chosen with proof that the bond is somehow special. The chosen relationship threatens that inflation. It introduces reality, and reality can feel quieter than fantasy. Quieter, but far more demanding, because reality asks you to stand in your own worth without the adrenaline of chasing. That is hard, very hard. Jung would likely also point toward the persona here. Many people develop a love persona without realizing it. The understanding one, the devoted one, the one who can handle complexity, the one who stays through emotional ambiguity, the one whose love becomes visible through patience. That persona often receives a strange kind of moral dignity. It says, look how deeply I can love. Look how much I can hold. Look how much I can endure. Then someone simply chooses you. And now the persona loses its stage. You no longer need to prove love through suffering. You no longer need to demonstrate worth by tolerating ambiguity. You no longer need to be the one who waits more beautifully than other people. That can trigger grief and panic at the same time. Because if the role dies, who are you in love now? Carl Jung would not see that as trivial. He would see it as a symbolic death of an old identity. And symbolic death is always disturbing to the ego, even when it makes way for something healthier. That is why being chosen can feel dangerous. Not because love is bad, because an old self may have to die in order for chosen love to be lived fully. This also explains why some people feel more chemistry with the withholding person. The withholding person allows the old persona and the old complex to stay active. The choosing person does not. The choosing person invites a new way of being, one that may involve softness, receptivity, trust, and direct worth. Those capacities may be deeply underdeveloped. A concrete example. A man is used to having to impress emotionally distant partners. When a woman openly admires him and expresses steady interest, he suddenly feels exposed. He starts becoming critical of small things about her. He feels off without knowing why. Jung would say that criticism may be functioning here as defense. If he can devalue the person choosing him, he can protect himself from a more frightening task of receiving her love as real. That is one of the hidden defenses in this pattern. Devaluation, distance, sudden overanalysis, emotional numbness, a manufactured need for space. All of these help restore the old structure. Carl Jung's famous line fits perfectly again. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Without consciousness, you will keep telling a story like, I only want what I can't have. I lose interest when people like me. Being chosen makes me panic for no reason. Jung would say there is a reason. The psyche has a history. The ego has an identity. The complex is a script. And clear love is stepping into a field where all of that gets activated. There's another layer here that matters a lot. Self-image. If someone chooses you more clearly than you have chosen yourself, their desire can feel too large to inhabit. They see something lovable, valuable, steady, desirable, and if you do not yet feel home in that image, their love starts feeling like pressure. Not because love is wrong, but because it is asking you to occupy a larger self than the one you have safely lived inside. That can be terrifying, because now you are not only wanted, you are wanted as you. And that means you can no longer hide inside rejection or blame all your suffering on never being chosen enough. Now the deeper issue becomes visible. Can you live inside being loved? Jung would say this is where the ego's inferiority often meets the possibility of real relationship. If deep down you still feel unworthy, then clear choice from another person does not simply soothe you. It destabilizes you. It creates a split between how they see you and how you experience yourself. The larger that gap, the more dangerous love can feel. This is why some people pull away the moment they are deeply wanted. They are not only escaping intimacy, they are escaping the psychic dissonance of being valued beyond what their current self-image can contain. That is not a small problem. It is one of the deepest problems in love. Because until that dissonance is made conscious, every good relationship may begin feeling wrong, precisely when it starts becoming emotionally real. Carl Jung would want you to ask, what part of me is more comfortable being deprived than being received? What part of me trusts longing more than having? What old identity still depends on the wound of not being fully chosen? Those are the real questions. Not because the answer will instantly fix everything, but because once those questions are asked honestly, the panic around being chosen becomes interpretable. It stops looking like random self-sabotage. It becomes a psyche trying to protect an old structure that healthy love is beginning to dissolve. Because once you see that being wanted feels dangerous not because it is wrong, but because it is reorganizing your old emotional world, then the task changes. Now the question is no longer, why am I like this? Now the question becomes, how do I stay long enough inside being chosen for the psyche to learn that love does not have to be earned through pain? That is where real transformation begins. Watch what your mind does after someone chooses you clearly, not during the fantasy, not while you are still wondering. After the kind text that does not leave room for confusion, after the direct invitation, after the clear affection, after the steady follow-through. That is the moment everything important starts happening. Because if your old pattern has been built around longing, then clear love does not simply feel good. It interrupts a whole internal system. And the first instinct of that system is often not to trust the new reality. It is to test it, doubt it, slow it down, overthink it, or quietly run from it. Carl Jung would say this is where consciousness has to enter, not when love is still distant and romanticized, when it becomes real enough to threaten the old identity. That is why the work here is not convince yourself to like someone nice. That would be too shallow. The real work is learning how to stay in contact with the discomfort of being wanted without immediately turning that discomfort into a reason to leave. That is a serious psychological discipline, because the old reaction usually feels intelligent. It will come dressed as caution, discernment, timing, intuition, loss of spark, or something just feels off. Sometimes those things are true, but Jung would ask you to slow down and differentiate much more carefully. Is something truly off in a relationship, or is something old being activated in you because a relationship is healthier than what your psyche knows how to regulate around? That distinction changes everything. A real-life example. A woman is dating someone who is kind, direct, and emotionally available. He makes his interests clear. He does not disappear. He is not trying to impress her through emotional withholding. On paper and in reality, he is giving her what she said she wanted. But after a few weeks, she starts feeling strangely restless. She thinks about ending it. She wonders whether she is forcing attraction. She misses the emotional charge she used to feel with unavailable people. Now, if she follows the old pattern automatically, the story becomes, this must not be right. But if she works in a Jungian way, the story becomes a question. What exactly is feeling unfamiliar here? That question opens a door. Maybe what feels unfamiliar is not the person. Maybe it is the absence of emotional labor. Maybe what feels strange is not lack of chemistry. Maybe it is the fact that she is not being forced into proving herself. Maybe what feels flat is actually the nervous system, without its usual dose of uncertainty. That is what has to become conscious. Carl Jung repeatedly pointed toward the importance of withdrawing projection and seeing psychic structure clearly. If you have been projecting love onto difficulty, then ease will initially feel empty. If you have been projecting meaning onto longing, then being received may feel less profound than it actually is. If you have built identity around chase, then mutuality will feel almost disorienting. So the first movement in healing is simple, though not easy. You stop obeying the first interpretation. You feel the urge to pull away, and instead of instantly building a philosophy around it, you pause. You ask, is this fear? Is this grief? Is this boredom? Or is this the old pattern starving because it is not being fed? That kind of pause is transformative. because the old self survives through speed. It reacts before deeper consciousness can speak. Healthy love appears, the body becomes uneasy, the mind supplies a story, and the relationship is abandoned before the psyche ever has to learn something new. Jung would say the unconscious remains in charge when this sequence stays invisible. So visibility is step one, not judgment, visibility. You notice the exact signs. You become more aware of how your system behaves when love is safe. Maybe you feel suspicious for no clear reason. Maybe you become suddenly hypercritical. Maybe you start craving distance. Maybe you feel emotionally flatter than you expected, and assume that must mean the bond lacks depth. Maybe you want to test a person just to recreate familiar uncertainty. These responses are not random. They are the old structure trying to restore emotional familiarity. The second movement is even harder. You stay long enough to let the body learn a new rhythm. This is where many people want a shortcut. They want one insight, one quote, one realization that makes healthy love feel instantly natural. But Jung never worked that way. He knew the psyche changes through repeated conscious experience. The nervous system learns by living through what once felt unsafe and discovering, over time, that it does not lead where it used to lead. So if someone is steady with you and you feel the urge to run, the question becomes, can you remain in contact with the steadiness without immediately converting it into a threat? Not forever in one giant heroic act, moment by moment, conversation by conversation, day by day. You let them be clear without forcing them to become unclear in your mind. You let them be consistent without making consistency suspicious just because it feels foreign. You let affection stay simple without demanding chaos in order to feel alive. This is a deeply embodied practice because often the body panics first. It tightens. It wants movement. It wants complication. It wants proof that the relationship still contains the old emotional texture. If you stay with that bodily discomfort consciously, without turning it into immediate action, something shifts. The psyche begins learning. I can be wanted and remain intact. I can be chosen without disappearing into it. I can receive without performing. I can let love be direct without needing to suffer for it first. These are enormous lessons. Carl Jung would likely say this is the ego forming a new relationship to love, one less organized by old complexes, and more capable of actual reality. There's also grief here, and it has to be honored. This part is often skipped. To be chosen clearly may awaken sadness for all the years you were not, or for the years you kept confusing pain with devotion, or for how much of your identity was built around being the one who waits, over functions, hopes, interprets, or accepts crumbs with dignity. When healthy love arrives, it may expose how unnecessary all that old suffering was, and that can hurt. You may grieve the old self, the self who knew how to survive in uncertainty, the self who proved love through endurance, the self who made a kind of home inside emotional famine. Jung would never dismiss that grief. He would see it as part of transformation. The old self is not simply being corrected. It is being outgrown. And every outgrowing contains mourning. If you do not allow that mourning, you may keep returning to the old pattern just to feel like yourself again. That is why healing here is not just about choosing better partners. It is about becoming a different self in love. A self who does not need pain to feel chosen. A self who does not need confusion to feel depth. A self who can receive attention without immediately bracing against it. A self who can let someone's clear affection remain real instead of turning it into pressure. This is also where self-image matters. If someone chooses you more clearly than you choose yourself, the relationship will keep producing psychic tension. Their certainty about your value will collide with your uncertainty about yourself. And unless that gap becomes conscious, being wanted will keep feeling like something too big to trust. So part of the work is inward. You begin asking, what in me still doubts that I could be wanted like this? What version of myself feels more believable when love is scarce than when love is present? What old identity still feels safer than simply being loved? Those questions matter because they start returning authority inward. The relationship is no longer the only stage. The real drama is being recognized as yours, not blamed entirely on the other person or the chemistry. And once that happens, something becomes possible that was not possible before. discernment without self-sabotage. You can evaluate the relationship more honestly because you are no longer confusing every activation with truth. This is important. The goal is not to force yourself into every calm relationship or to deny genuine incompatibility. The goal is to stop handing your decision-making over to old panic. Carl Jung would call it a movement toward consciousness and wholeness. The old pattern says, if I do not feel the old intensity, this must not be love. The more conscious psyche begins saying, let me find out whether what is missing is love or just a wound. That is a radically different way of approaching intimacy. And over time, if you keep practicing this, the emotional field changes. Safe love stops feeling so alien. Being chosen stops feeling like a trap. Clear affection stops sounding like pressure. You begin realizing that what once felt too easy may actually have been what your heart was always looking for. But your old self did not know how to survive. That is the real movement here. Not becoming passive. Not lowering standards. Not forcing feelings. Learning how to remain present long enough for goodness to stop feeling unreal. That is what it means to stay when love stops making you chase. And in Jungian terms, that may be one of the most important forms of love healing there is. Not finally finding someone perfect, but becoming able to receive what is healthy without mistaking your old fear for fate. This is the part that changes everything. Sometimes your deepest wound is not only that you were not chosen enough. Sometimes it is that you built an identity around not being chosen, and now being chosen feels like a threat to that identity. Carl Jung would have understood that immediately. He knew the psyche does not simply repeat pain because it enjoys pain. It repeats what has become emotionally organized, what has become familiar, what has become part of the ego's way of knowing itself. If love has repeatedly meant uncertainty, proving, waiting, and longing, then the self adapts around that pattern. It becomes good at surviving half-love, good at reading distance, good at staying attached inside confusion. But when someone actually chooses you, clearly, steadily, without making you earn it through suffering, the old self loses its role. And that can feel terrifying, not because love is wrong, because the old identity no longer knows what to do. That is why being wanted can feel harder than rejection. Rejection hurts, but it confirms the old world. Being chosen threatens to change it. Jung's quote belongs here one last time. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. If this pattern stays unconscious, you may keep telling yourself stories like, I just lose interest when people like me. I only want what I can't have. Being chosen makes me feel trapped. But Jung would say those are surface stories. The deeper story is this. Some part of you still trusts longing more than receiving. Some part of you still feels safer in uncertainty than in mutuality. Some part of you still does not fully believe that love can arrive without wounding you first. That is the real heartbreak. And it is also the real doorway. Because once you see it, the discomfort stops being meaningless. Now it becomes material for consciousness, for healing, for transformation. Before we close, sit with one direct question. What changes in you the moment someone stops making you chase and starts choosing you clearly? Do you become suspicious, flat, restless, overly analytical? Do you start inventing reasons to create distance? Whatever your answer is, that is not random. That is the exact place where your old attachment self is meeting a new possibility it does not yet know how to trust. If this resonates, write in the comments one sign you notice in yourself when someone genuinely wants you, not when they confuse you, when they choose you. And if you know someone who says they want real love, but keeps panicking the moment they start receiving it, please share this video with them. Because sometimes the deepest healing is not learning how to survive rejection. It is learning how to stay when love finally arrives without making you beg for it.